what got you into sports broadcasting? Like, what made you want to pursue that?
Well, growing up as a kid, what made me want to get into sports broadcasting was always seeing Sports Center on before I went to school in the morning. Stuart Scott, Rich Eisen, Dan Patrick, the GOATs, as I like to say. Now, as an athlete, you're around sports all the time, clearly. You watch the highlights on TV, so you've always followed the industry. And for me, about 10 years ago, I got my first opportunity to hop on as a guest analyst for a show. And I remember getting done, I just felt the same rush of emotions and high that you get after competing in a game. And I told myself, okay, this is what I want to do. This is a wonderful feeling. And if you can find this in a career, you're very lucky. And once I coupled that feeling with just the joy that I had being a broadcaster, it just set me on that path. And for me, it was something that allowed me to still stay involved with sports and follow the teams and the games that I love, but then also see it from a different perspective and look at these games and these players, these athletes, these stories with a different viewpoint. And so when it was all said and done, I just knew that this is something that I had to do 10 years ago. And it's been a slow journey as far as just, you don't arrive to your final destination as far as your career goes overnight. It's just a matter of putting in the work year after year. And here you are. So for me, I wanted to become a sports broadcaster because I just knew it was something that I loved to do.
Okay. And so how did you end up working for the Blazers?
So I found my way to the Blazers 4 years ago, but prior to that, I was the studio host for a show called Talkin' Ducks, and I had done that each week on NBC Sports Northwest for the first 4 or 5 seasons before I got picked up by the Blazers. And with it, I did some other things. I know that I did some courtside reporting for Rip City Live, which was a show produced by NBC Sports Northwest to get you ready for the Blazer games. And then for the Blazers themselves, I did fill in as the studio host twice when the regular host was out. And so when they were ready to make a transition in 2016, the executive producer approached me and we just had a conversation, and I told him it was something that I would love to do. And ever since then, I've loved being a part of the team. And I obviously followed the Blazers for all my time in Oregon over the last nearly 20 years. So I have just been living a dream, to be honest, covering a team that you've always admired, a team that you've always looked up to, and a team that you can really connect with.
So what was it like when you were first on TV broadcasting?
When I think back onto what it was like when I was first on TV broadcasting, I remember it was a little stiff at times because, like any athlete will tell you, when they begin a sport, there's a lot more thinking than reacting that goes on. Because you're new to it. You're trying to think through everything you do and make sure that you're doing it properly and doing it on time. And it's hard to really build up that rhythm to begin with. But once you get some reps, and that is a combination of successes, a combination of failures, a combination of a multitude of things, you finally get a chance to feel much more comfortable in the chair. And when you get a chance to do that, and you have that comfort level where you are now reacting rather than thinking, it makes it so much easier. But the first couple of years, yeah, a little stiff here and there, but everybody is when they get started. And you just have to have grace with yourself because nobody is an expert and nobody is a pro overnight. It takes years, it takes reps, it takes so many different types of ways that you have to evaluate yourself until you finally get into what I call your voice and your rhythm and your pattern. And for me, I just knew that, like any other sport that I picked up, like my example of football, it might be a little tough in the beginning, but if you just stick with it, you'll eventually get better. And fortunately for me, it worked out that way.
And to go off of that, what's going through your mind as you're in a game? I know some people might just be thinking what's happening here and now. Some people might be thinking, what's the kind of story of this game? I'm sure that's kind of changed going from being the analyst to being the play-by-play, but how does your mind work during the game?
Well, it's a very good question. As far as what my mind thinks about during a game, when I'm an analyst and I was doing the studio show, doing the pregame, halftime, postgame show, you're really paying attention to the big picture storylines that have developed. We have our pregame storylines for our pregame show. For our halftime show, you're going to see which storylines develop or were consistent in the first half. And then for the postgame show, it's really the theme of the game, what really stood out as we look forward to the next game. When you're play-by-play, you really get a chance just to get lost in the game and to really tap into the emotion of the game. And what are we feeling? What does the team look like? What's their body language look like? How is this reflective of the stakes at play for this team? And you're really taking it possession by possession, but in the back of your mind, you do want to make sure you're addressing some of the common themes that develop. For example, in a game against the Lakers, you realize, wow, the Lakers have shot a lot of free throws. So every time the Lakers go to the free throw line, you maybe bring that up. Or there's another game where Yusuf Nurkic looks very impressive in his second or third game back. You're going to reference that. Hey, reminder everyone, Yusuf Nurkic, he's been out for nearly a year. Here he is looking great. So it's just some of those couple of storylines that we discussed prior to the game that you bring up throughout it when you're play-by-play, but it's really a possession-by-possession approach as the play-by-play guy versus the big picture ideas that you look at as an analyst.
So is there any part of being a broadcaster that really like surprised you when you first started doing it? You were like, I did not expect that.
One thing that really surprised me when I became a broadcaster, you hear the joke, the camera adds 15 pounds. Not true at all. But I will say what's surprising about the camera and anytime you're in front of it and speaking through a microphone, there's a bit of energy that just naturally gets lost. And so while you might feel like you're expressing a lot of energy and emotion, like you would if you and I were sitting here face to face across the table from one another and talking,
Mm-hmm.
some of that does get lost in the broadcast. And so it is a bit of a performance sometimes when you hit some of those main points in the story of a broadcast. For example, if we're coming into a game and the Blazers are taking on the Lakers, it's not enough just to say, Portland taking on the Lakers. It's good evening as the Portland Trailblazers get set to face off against the Los Angeles Lakers. And learning more about that projection and how you really have to turn the dial up a little bit while staying genuine was something that it's an art. And you realize when you get done with each game, you have to approach it and be mindful and thoughtful about what you're doing, whether it's analyst, studio host, play-by-play. There is that energy you have to bring, and you have to be able to bring it in a way that's authentic and doesn't come across as cheesy.
So what's your favorite part of being a broadcaster?
I would say my favorite part about being a broadcaster is still being able to be a fan of the game. I love basketball, and it doesn't matter whether it's a great play from the Blazers or a great play from the opposing team. Being able just to appreciate the caliber of athletes that these NBA players are, or whatever sports you're covering, being able to appreciate what they're doing and be able to witness that and see their growth season after season, that's my favorite part. Obviously, being a part of the game and tapping into that energy and feeling that emotion is great, but really just being a fan of the game. And as a former athlete, being able to relate to a certain degree with what these players are going through, that's been my favorite part.
What's the biggest challenge in broadcasting for you?
I would say the biggest challenge in broadcasting is just that constancy of staying on, as I like to say. With broadcasting, we don't get a delete key. We don't get a chance to go out there with a rough draft, take a look at it, make some changes, and then put in a clean copy. The camera is rolling, as we like to say. So when that red light goes on, anything you put out there is now out there. And with that, there's not any pressure you feel, but it's just the reality of the situation is it's an occupation where you're very visible in what you do and you need to be on. And for a play-by-play game, you have to be on and focused and attentive to every single play throughout this 2-hour plus game and bring that energy from the opening tip all the way to the end of the game. And doing that, it does take a lot of energy to do. A lot of broadcasters will tell you, especially after doing a game, they are a little mentally wiped afterwards because it is so much focus and concentration you're putting into it. But going back to the athlete side, that's what's so rewarding about it. I remember as an athlete, you get done with the game and you're just exhausted and you're tired because you put forth a good effort. It's the same way with broadcasting. It's a really nice feeling to be done knowing that you put your heart and soul into each broadcast, and this is how you should feel afterwards. So that is a challenge, but it's a challenge that you enjoy about it. As you know, some of the best things we do in life have some degree of challenge to them. We do like to be challenged every once in a while, and if there's that right amount of challenge with what you do, that's what allows you to stay really engaged, and that's what's great about this gig.
what's the atmosphere like before a game is about to start?
The atmosphere before a game starts, it really depends on what's at stake with the game. You can go to a regular season game, and sure, it feels busy in Moda Center prior to tip off, but everybody understands win or lose, this game isn't going to make or break the season. Then you have a game against, say, the Lakers or the Warriors over the last couple of years, where it is one of the top teams in the league, a star-studded squad coming into Moda Center. Then there's more energy to the game. There's this anticipation, this excitement as everyone shows up early to get a chance to watch these guys work out. But then you get to a playoff game or a must-win game, and there's just this constant buzz and this tension, not in a negative sense, but tension, and there's some weight to this. There's some gravity to this that persists throughout the entire evening. And those are awesome environments to be in. And when you get a chance to be a part of the action with that, when it comes to broadcasting the game and giving it to the fans, that's something really special right there.
So how has COVID changed what it's like to be a broadcaster? Obviously, it affects everyone in some way.
Well, COVID has certainly impacted every capacity of life, it seems like. And sports certainly were not immune to it. And it is interesting how the NBA, many people could point to that issue between the Denver Nuggets and the Utah Jazz, I believe it was, or the Mavericks and the Jazz, whatever two teams were getting ready to play off. Oklahoma City, actually, and the Jazz, how sports was kind of the catalyst for the nation pivoting to this. But the way that COVID-19 has impacted our world is that we did all of these games, the NBA restart and the bubble, we did those in a studio in Portland. And usually when you're play-by-play and you're analyst for a game, you are there on site to capture that energy, that emotion in the arena. Well, now you don't have that. And now you're calling games on a monitor, and you don't have that crowd, that energy, that atmosphere to feed off of and to play off of as well. And so it's certainly made for a unique broadcasting experience, but I was really proud of the job that Trailblazers Broadcasting did to cover these games. And it just taught us all that we need to be flexible. Whatever we used to do in the past, that probably won't be here for a while. We'll get there someday. I fully believe so. But as of right now, you have to be flexible, whether it's calling stuff in a studio remotely, whether it's doing Zoom calls back and forth with your athletes and your coaches that you're interviewing. You need to find a way to still have that human touch and have that connection, even though you can't physically be there with the things that you're doing.
So what's it like? What's your preparation for a game? How do you prepare? What's it like?
So my preparation for a game obviously depends on my role. If I am doing the pregame, halftime, postgame show in the studio, it's a conversation that morning with our producer, and we talk about some of the topics we're going to cover in the game. I'll check over some of the stats and the game notes for the teams, but really we want to get down those 4 or 5 major talking points for the game. I'll kind of flip through the rundown. So that takes me about 45 minutes to an hour prior to the game. Then when I get to the game, about 2 hours beforehand, we'll do a rehearsal for about a half hour for our opening show. And then we just sort of watch warm-ups, and we get a chance to really see if anything else develops. Oh, is this player maybe limping a little bit in warm-ups? Or, hey, this guy looks very healthy. Or what is this team really thinking about? Reading that body language. And then half hour before tip-off, we're ready to go with the pregame show. When I'm doing the play-by-play the night before, you look at a previous game of the team that you're getting ready to play. So let's say, for example, the Blazers were taking on the Nets in the final regular seeding game of the bubble. You watch a Nets game and you want to hear how their announcers pronounce the names, and then you watch it on mute and you practice calling their names because you're familiar with the Blazers and all their players, but you have to be very quick about recognizing the players for the opposing team, and you want to make sure you get 20 to 30 minutes of good reps doing that. Then I've got some notes that I'll look over, notes for both the Blazers and the Nets, individual notes, about 3 or 4 bullet points for each player that you really want to just take a look at. You'll get a chance to reference them during the game, but you want to have a ballpark idea of the storylines with each player. So when something happens, you know then to quickly pivot to that player, and then you can read the specific stat or story regarding that particular player. When we get to the game, we're there 2 hours beforehand. We have a half-hour rehearsal for our pregame show as the play-by-play and analyst. And then we just continue to kind of go over our notes. We listen to what the coaches say in their interviews to see if they give us any other information that we can reference. And then it's tip-off time. But what it is prior to the game is you're just trying to gather as much information as you can that might lead to a helpful anecdote at some point.
So what made you move from playing football, to announcing basketball? And if like you were given the chance, would you move over to doing football announcing?
Well, really, when it came to moving from a football player to basketball announcing, that was just what was really available. My first gig as a studio host, though, was talking about Oregon Duck football. And that was the benefit of playing all three sports in college: football, basketball, and track. You have a background in each one of those. And basketball, I've played since I was 5 years old. My dad was a coach, so I know the game very, very well. Same thing with track and field. Football is a little new to the game, but picked up enough of my years there to really break things down and host a show about it. So for me, I've always really loved basketball. As much as I had success with football, basketball was my first love. And I've always been a fan of the NBA since the 80s and 90s. So for me, it's just a joy to be able to cover the college game and the NBA game over the last couple of years, and also be ready to step aside and do some track or do some football when they need me to.
Well, what was your reaction when you found out that you were going to be replacing Kevin Calabro?
Well, my reaction when they asked me to temporarily step in and be the play-by-play guy, and that's the key word, temporarily, because there hasn't been any decision made on the future for this position, I was honored. Obviously, that is a very daunting task when you look at what's at stake and everything that we discussed as far as how COVID changed the sports broadcasting world. But you go back to a challenge, and I never want to back away from a challenge. And I was excited for the opportunity. I put in a ton of preparation, calling games quarter by quarter, then half by half, then full game by full game, and just listening to myself and trying to pick up my cadence and rhythm and everything I could do. And I really embraced the challenge. And for me, I knew that there's no replacing Kevin Calabro. He's a legend. You can only be yourself. And I told myself, come in, don't be vanilla, have as much fun as you can have, be professional, be polished, and do it the way you would like to do it if you're going to be doing it for 20 years. And for me, that's what helped me remain genuine in this role. And I was really honored that they thought of me. And I really got to thank the Blazers for giving us some very, and I mean very, exciting games in the bubble.
How important would you say is having chemistry with the person or people that you were talking with during a game or during a show? How important would you say that is?
A lot of people wonder if it's important to have chemistry, and I think it can only enhance what you're trying to do, because at the end of the day, we want to be entertaining, whether it's a game or studio show. And part of that entertainment factor comes along with people just enjoying each other's company. And if you can do that, it's going to come across as more genuine, whatever you do, especially the humorous parts and the parts that have that human touch to it when you're not just rattling off stats and replays. So I feel like chemistry is really, really important, and just being able to be on the same page as the person you're with and enjoy working with them. And I've been fortunate. Every single person I've sat with on that desk has been an absolute joy to work with, and I'm really grateful for that.
What's traveling like? So obviously, I know you probably haven't done it much yourself, because I don't think analysts travel, and
No.
you didn't get to travel in your time as a play-by-play. But from what you know, like, what's it like for other broadcasters?
Well, because I was doing the games remotely in Portland, I have not had a chance to travel with the team yet. The studio show, we're sort of the last line of defense, as I like to say. We do all of our games from Portland, home and away, which is really nice as far as being home for your family each night. But the travel, it can be a lot on everybody. I mean, you are crossing several different time zones on given road trips, and sometimes you're going to 4 cities and 7 nights, and it's a lot. They do travel in style. I mean, you certainly get a chartered plane and they stay in comfortable hotels, but that doesn't change the fact that it can be exhausting. And with that, it's just another factor that you have to take into consideration as far as bringing your energy and being on. Now, it probably is fun to check out all these different arenas and all these different cities, I would imagine, and getting a chance to tour those. And so either way you look at it, there's a lot of excitement that goes with it, but it is a grind. There's a reason why so many players especially say the travel's a grind in the NBA.
What's the off season like? Obviously, there's no games to do.
The offseason really varies for every individual. Some people like to stay involved in broadcasting and do a lot of freelance events. Other people like to completely shut it down. For myself, I've always stayed very busy in the off seasons. I do play-by-play for Nintendo and a lot of their esports tournaments, and that has been a lot of fun. It's been a lifelong dream ever since I was about 5 years old to talk about video games on TV. And then I also run some youth sport camps. So I also run my own business and do that. We work with about 2,000 kids in the Pacific Northwest and put on camps in the summer. So I like to stay busy, and I look at seasonality in my life. You have the season of the Blazers, and that gets done. Then you have the season of some freelance stuff, and that gets done. Then the season of your camps, that gets done. And then you have about a 2-month off season from about mid-August to mid-October, and then you're ready to roll again. So the seasons and the years seem to go by very quickly, but I love the pace to it. And every broadcaster will tell you that it is seasonality, that you certainly do need that period where you're off and you're done. But then it is also really fun when you get to those really busy moments where it's playoffs or a flurry of games around the holidays, that it can be really exciting.
So has being a broadcaster presented you with any other opportunities outside of broadcasting itself?
Being a broadcaster, as far as presenting other opportunities outside of sports itself, a couple of things have popped up. I've been asked to hop on a couple of boards for development projects of a youth sports park in Eugene. There's also the board for a children's hospital up here in Portland I've been asked to be a part of. And so you are visible in the community that you broadcast in. And with that, there comes some opportunities for speaking engagements and stuff like that. But I try to have balance, because at the end of the day, work is work, but family comes first. And I always want to make sure that I'm not putting too much on my plate to where I can't be there and be a great husband for my wife and be a very involved and active dad for my kids. And for me, you do want to be careful about everything you say yes to. No can be a very popular word that you do want to pick up sometimes just to protect your time, but it's an honor to be asked and considered to do some of these things outside of the world of sports broadcasting.
And just to wrap it up, what advice would you give to someone like me who wants to go into sports broadcasting?
The best advice that I'd give to anybody looking to get started in sports broadcasting, there's a couple little nuggets. Number one, don't compare yourself to other people. Everyone's journey is going to look completely different. There will be people that the second they graduate out of college, they somehow get plugged into a major network, and in 2 years you see them doing whatever for an ESPN or a huge network potentially. There's other people that it'll take 5, 10, 15 years kind of grinding and bouncing away from spot to spot until they really do land that gig where it can become a full-time job. And I tell people just to have patience with the process and to enjoy it. Don't be so fixated on the end game as far as I want to be at this network that you don't make the most of your opportunities up until then. Number two, I would tell people be as positive, professional, and easy to work with as possible. You'd be amazed at how many people sometimes miss out on opportunities because they just weren't easy to work with. And I think if you can do that and be professional and be kind to all the people behind the scenes that are really the stars in what we do, you'd be amazed at just the connections that you can make when you do that. And then number three, say yes to as many opportunities as you can early on when you have the time and you have that availability, because getting those reps, you never know when you do something who it might connect you with or what little nugget you might pick up. But I think if you do that and just start at a foundation of, I just want to enjoy what I'm doing, and this is something I'm passionate about, then you will have the patience and the persistence to get to where you eventually want to be someday. It takes a lot of work, and there aren't seats for everybody at every single level, of course. But if you make your main focus, I enjoy sports broadcasting and I'm going to be the best broadcaster I can be, then you can't go wrong.
Okay, so thank you for taking the time to do this. It's really an honor to be able to interview you.